Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the North Carolina Botanical Gardens Lunchbox Talk program. We're really excited to have another program in the Saving Our Savannah Stories of the Longleaf Pine series for you today. I'm Joanna Massey-Lalikas. I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement here at the North Carolina Botanical Garden, and David Michaud is co-moderating in the background. He's going to be helping our speaker, supporting her moderation of your questions for a Q&A time at the end of the program. We really want to thank all of you for being here today, and we're excited to have folks from across North Carolina, as well as from Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, Alabama, Ohio, Virginia, and California signed up to watch this program. All right, so it's really my privilege to introduce to you Colette DeGarady, who is the Longleaf Pine Whole System Director for the Nature Conservancy. Colette leads a regional conservation program that supports longleaf pine conservation and restoration efforts across 9 states. She's been with the Nature Conservancy for more than 20 years, and she started her career with TNC by looking for the rarest plants in South Carolina. And now she plays a key role in reviving and sustaining the native longleaf pine forests that, as you all know by now, by watching these programs that stretch from East Texas to Southern Virginia. She also serves on the board of the South Carolina Native Plant Society and has done that since 2003 and initiated their local native plant sales in 2007. Colette is passionate about native plants and their importance in creating healthy and resilient ecosystems for wildlife and people, and is passionate about the longleaf pine ecosystems, as you'll hear in her presentation today. So Colette, thank you so much for being with us, and I will hand this off to you. Feel free to share your screen when you're ready.
Okay, thanks so much. I'm glad to be here. And while I'm sharing my screen here, so I'm going to speak today about some, current things happening with longleaf restoration and future trends, how the evolving world we live in is influencing the work we're doing with longleaf and our partnership and our decisions and our strategic planning. So again, I know there's been a great series of discussions around longleaf through this platform, and I hope I don't repeat too much. I'll touch on a few things that may have been said before, but repetition is a great way to absorb information. So, as already mentioned, I'm Colette DeGarady. I've been with TNC for a while and started on the ground doing rare plant surveys like this. This is at Sandy Island in South Carolina. And I love the connectivity of doing in a lot of programs on the ground, and then being able to take that knowledge of what it takes to do that and help inform larger decisions about getting resources to the ground, policy changes, and everything in between to help guide the work that's happening at scale. As many of you have walked in a longleaf forest before or at some point, when you walk through a really well-managed longleaf forest, it just feels right. It feels so good. And so it is a passion of mine. And a lot of the rare plant surveys that I started with 20 plus years ago were in longleaf. We know that fire disturbance really helps create and maintain that wonderful biodiversity contained within longleaf. And I usually like to just note the difference in longleaf forest that we are working towards managing. There's this great range of really dry and xeric forests, like the left photo here of sandy soils that may not have a ton of biodiversity, but has what it's supposed to in that habitat. And then you have the other spectrum that's very wet, has other things like carnivorous plants and things like that hold in a wetter system, and in between that shrub and precocians and all of the above. So such a wide range of longleaf forests that we are currently managing across the range. And the evolution of that interest and importance of longleaf for the Nature Conservancy, it really started with that biodiversity, with that, in longleaf forests and their associated habitats hold a quarter of the documented plant species in North America, including Canada. So just a tremendous amount. And I know we've all heard of Bob Pete's research, and that's talks about the number of species per square meter that have been documented up in, around 40 or so. So it's just a tremendous glimpse of what longleaf forest can do. And that's a good main reason that the Nature Conservancy originally decades ago started working with longleaf. But there's also so many other great reasons. Private landowners can think more along the lines of what that forest management can do for them, and the recreational hunting and uneven age management over time with harvests that produce income but maintain their forests. Of course, the Department of Defense and that National Defense really like longleaf forests to practice in. And we're learning more and more all the time about the cultural significance from our indigenous partners across the range, and working more closely with them in a variety of ways. But what we're starting to talk about more and more these recent years is the resiliency, and what do longleaf pine forests mean in the face of a changing climate. And I'm going to talk more about that throughout this talk, but that includes things like the wildfire resistance based on the way we're already managing it, the insect, pest, and pathogen resistance compared to other pines. And, in the face of increasing storm events, the increased resistance that longleaf has to that as well. So we're looking more into that research and anecdotal stories that we're seeing, and learning more about the evolution of how longleaf pine forests can help in the face of a changing climate. And many of you have seen the range-wide map of longleaf pine shown here in the gray, the historic accounts of being able to drive a wagon through that open forest across the range of 90 million acres, minus hopping over the Mississippi River. And some newer data, which you may not have seen, are the occurrences of longleaf pine that we're starting to be able to map a little bit better with better tools. And today, this green shows a glimpse of the occurrences that we do know about. And it's a stark contrast of what we have, about 5.2 million acres from that original 90 million acres, really one of the greatest habitat losses out there. And I want to be sure to, this is another way to look at that habitat loss and talk about the evolution of where we started in 90 million acres and how low that acreage got, and then how we started to bounce back. And around 1990 was the low of just over 2 million acres, or around 2 million acres. And there's thankfully started to be a trend and a focus more on restoring longleaf habitats after that, which started to bump our numbers up. And one of those trends was the evolution of the partnership America's Longleaf Restoration Initiative, which spans the range, has 30 plus partners, and is really considered one of the best collaborations in the country. It's been and I'll be touching a little bit more on it as we go. We have a goal through that partnership of restoring the longleaf up to 8 million acres across the range. And currently we're at about 5.2. There's this balance of all the good work we're doing to plant longleaf versus the losses that continue for a variety of reasons. And we're trying to figure out what is the trend with some of the losses that we're having. And through that partnership, local implementation teams were formed on the ground. And this is just a really important mechanism to do localized work with local partners related to local issues happening. And there's roughly 17, 18 partnerships, or those local implementation teams across the range. There's been adaptation over time, and now the Okefenokee, Osceola, and the Ocala have blended into one big one. And that's just part of the evolution of adaptive management, looking at these boundaries, looking at new opportunities to be able to change and shift and do this work, both locally, and then what that means for connecting the dots at scale. For the Nature Conservancy, we have our own focal areas, which are tied closely to those implementation teams, and you can see them here. And we've based our focal areas on a couple of things, but resilience of the habitat in the face of a changing climate is a big one. So the layer that you see, which is cut out by the historic range here, shows the darkest green means highest resilience of habitats. And a number of factors go into mapping that. Some of it includes intact forest blocks, existing anchors of longleaf and biodiversity, and then wildlife corridors, and the ability for wildlife to move through corridors is an important factor. And that's why some of this follows water bodies, but it's connecting longleaf habitats around those bodies of water. As you think about wildlife movement and what wildlife populations need to continue to exist. So TNC, we of course are one of the many partners working with America's Longleaf, but then we think about, well, what's our highest niche? Where can we do our best work? And so we also focus in these focal areas connected to local implementation teams. And we do lead or co-lead about 10 or 11 of the 17, 18 local implementation teams. And then it's shifting because that one just blended. So that's where we're at. So I want to shift and just talk about a couple of current projects that TNC and partners are working on across the range, and then I'll switch back to a broader scale of where we're going with future thinking. So just starting here in East Texas, the western end of the range, in the Big Thicket area, I wanted to highlight a great partnership with the Alabama Coshada tribe in this area, and it's a collaborative around prescribed fire and the evolution of what this indigenous tribe has been doing for centuries and quite a long time, and how now they're working hand in hand with partners on the ground, and the Nature Conservancy being one of those partners. Our TNC fire manager on the ground, Sean, he's often says it's just a neighborly way, to connect, and that's the case with fire across the range. There's such a nice evolution of sharing resources, working across boundaries, and this is a great example of that. And I'm going to share a really brief video that helps just talk about this partnership, because I think it's just so touching. See if hopefully this works. And if it doesn't, we'll move on, but I think it was just working, so let's see if it's...
The longleaf pine has been a part of our culture for many centuries. We would use the trees to make our cabins. We would use the needles to make our baskets. So, it's very important that we move that tradition down, because once we lose that information, we lose part of our culture. And the same thing happens to the species. If we lose that species, it's no longer part of our culture.
I call it the tree that fire built. Without fire, you don't have longleaf. Fire suppression, or removing fire from the landscape, has attributed to the loss of this habitat that needs fire to exist.
We want to make sure that these longleaf pines are stimulated, make sure they have some good growth. I personally wanted to bring this resource back to the tribe, make it readily accessible, and then take advantage of the longleaf that is here.
The partnership with the Alabama Coshada, we really partnered to get fire on the landscape together. You can't do this work alone, so you're going to need all the players and all the partners to ultimately put more acres in longleaf here in Southeast Texas.
We have this valuable resource right here. This is the woods that we grew up in. To know that I could use my talents, my skills to improve our lands, it really means a lot to me to have this resource for the benefit of the tribe.
If I can go back to the presentation. Okay, great. So that was just a little clip of their work together and the connection of fire on the ground there. And that is within the Texas local implementation team, the lands where they're working together on the ground. And I know that across the range, there's a lot of other great connections and partnerships with indigenous tribes related to longleaf and other habitat improvement that are occurring. It's such a great trend to have more resources and engagement in that space and learning more about the knowledge and culture that and evolution of their history with longleaf has been a really important piece to factor into our partnership and the work that we're doing moving forward. So switching gears a little bit, back to the great biodiversity of longleaf. There's so much to talk about here. This could be, and probably is, another talk in your series alone, but I'm going to zoom into the red-cockaded woodpecker and move to the other end of the range. There's so much good work happening currently across the range with restoring red-cockaded woodpecker habitat, and has been since they were listed around 1970. Fish and Wildlife and other partners, of course, have been doing great work in this space with our Department of Defense and so many others. And in Virginia, the key northern range of the RCW on our TNC's Piney Grove Preserve, they just have a really neat story of the evolution of work that's happened there over the past 20 years. And I have to mention too, you see this up in the corner, a neat project as well that occurred with a local brewery coming out to Piney Grove, collecting longleaf pine branches and infusing it into an IPA beer, which has turned out wonderful. It's delicious. And a really neat family partnership with that brewery, working with the Nature Conservancy in that area on a variety of habitats. But that was a neat story. And I think there's other breweries that are following step with that. So keep your eyes out if you're a beer fan. So back to RCWs, again, a keystone species of longleaf habitats in Virginia. It's been a great story because there's a lot more loblolly pines still in Virginia. And even on Piney Grove Preserve, the old growth loblolly pine that has been there is where RCWs are living, in addition to the longleaf that they are restoring there and continuing to include. This is showing a graph here of the trend from 2000, where there's only 2 family breeding groups, and how they've been able to increase it to a very nice self-sustaining group. And in the early days, cavity inserts like this were a key part of helping to expand the habitat in Piney Grove for recruited RCWs from other areas, South Carolina recruitment colonies, and where there were higher populations. And translocation happens a lot throughout the range in order to help increase these populations. And this is one of many success stories playing out. And then once those recruited RCWs took hold and utilized the cavity inserts, of the past several years, there have not needed to be any more cavity inserts. Those RCWs are thriving on their own, building new cavity holes as they need to, even though that could take quite a long time, 6 months to a year and a half, depending on the tree and different circumstances. So that is a great story about the RCW at that end of the range. And now actually RCWs are spreading from that Piney Grove Preserve and in other areas of Virginia and North Carolina as well. So, and then just a couple other quick examples. And your backyard, or for those folks in North Carolina now, the Green Swamp Preserve that the Nature Conservancy manages is just a really great example of how to think through building your management practices to help bring back a place that has an immense diversity of such a unique flora on the ground. And of course, many folks know that the Venus flytrap is indigenous just to this one, basically, I forget how many square mile radius around this area. So super special there as well, in addition to all of the other wonderful savanna-like and carnivorous plants that are in this area. And so having to think through the timing of burns is really important to help maintain those populations. and sometimes plan outside the box, not just those winter burns, but moving into different seasonal burns and summer growing burns and things like that to help maintain the right conditions and help those things thrive. And they've had just a really great success story over time and keeping a lot of these great plants on the ground for all kinds of folks to enjoy in that public space. And finally, in another really great story in southern Mississippi, where one of a handful of gopher tortoise Head Start programs is occurring right now, where the eggs of gopher tortoises are being collected from the population on Camp Shelby. There's 60,000 acres of Longleaf, which is just a great resource out there that's been growing for quite a while. And a lot of gopher tortoises in that sandy soil. So they're able to collect eggs to give those tortoises a much better head start in life. The statistics out there of growing in the wild and having high mortality rates versus growing them for the first couple of years in situations like this where they get high nutrition, consistent nutrition, and they just don't have that predation factor is great. And so they grow these tortoises from eggs for about 2 years and then release them in the wild and back to their habitat here on the Camp Shelby in southern Mississippi. And just to give you a sense too of the difference in how big the Head Start tortoises can get relative to those in the wild, just based on higher nutrition factors. And so when they are released, they're in a healthier state. And then sometimes, they do research on other tortoises or put translocators on them to track movements and just add information to how best to maintain and improve the population of gopher tortoises in this area. And just, this is just a snapshot of a few public TNC preserves across the range. If you're traveling throughout the range, there's many more than this. And then TNC also holds a lot of private lands as well. And of course, there's wonderful public lands as well with so much longleaf on it, our national wild, everything, and state lands as well. So just giving you a snapshot here of some of those that we really love across the range in most of the states. So in looking back at that America's Longleaf Partnership and where we are collectively, we had a really milestone moment last fall where we celebrated our 15-year anniversary in Washington, D.C. This was a tremendous effort and really important in helping to solidify our federal leadership and other partner inputs and maintaining that momentum that we've already had for the last 15 years. We celebrated our successes and currently we've planted with data through 2023 about 1.8 million acres of longleaf, and that equates to about more than 1 billion trees planted since America's Longleaf started. So since we started counting those results of our partnership. And then we've protected almost 400,000 acres of longleaf-related habitat in the historic range, and treated almost 19 million acres with prescribed fire. So some really just great collaborative moments through time here where we're trying to achieve that success and continue to drive towards 8 million acres of longleaf pine. And in tandem with that, and celebrating those last 15 years, we want to make sure we're setting ourselves up for the next 15 years. So that celebration was part of that. And then writing our new conservation plan was really important as well. So we've had our original conservation plan, which is wrapping up the end of this year. And we've just finished our 2025 to 2040 plan that we'll be looking we will be looking towards in the future to help guide our work. And it's really this plan is used as a framework for the partnership and a catalyst to project work. A lot of other agencies and partners, even including the Nature Conservancy, tier some of our strategies off of this work. It's science-based. And I want to say knowledge-based too is a great term to start using more, as well as we bring in some of that cultural and historic and indigenous knowledge into the work that we're doing. Site-based, it's based on site-based efforts and context on the land, and collaboration of public and private sectors. And of course, it's a partnership all the way. We have just a really great base of sharing. Where not really one entity is doing it all with such a collaborative effort, which is really nice. And this is a long link on this slide, but you can, Google conservation plan or head to the America's Longleaf and look in the resource tab and find it pretty easily if you'd like to have it for any reason or review it. In that conservation plan, we have emphasized more information about climate and what we're doing in that space, because we know based on climate change, there are changing threats to our forests. There's new or shifting pests and pathogens based on the tolerance levels with climate, increased drought, flooding events, storm events, wildfires are all factors as we are mitigating the effects of climate, or things that we're seeing out there. And this is just an example in the Kisatchie National Forest after they had hurricane storms and tornadoes in recent years. And this whole entire field was full of mature longleaf. It's a real shame, but they have done an amazing job of working towards restoration out there. And cavity inserts with RCWs was a big play after those storms in order to help stabilize those RCW populations. So it's a great tool to have. So this is a TNC chart about climate solutions. And just want to highlight on this, I know it's busy, the top tier here about reforestation, natural forest management, and fire management being key solutions to climate mitigation, because in the face of a lot of different types of strategies here, we've got to make sure we're thinking through what forests can do for us. They help regulate the climate, and they hold vast amounts of carbon dioxide that helps, of course, cool the planet. And so TNC and others are thinking about, okay, how can we make sure that we're thinking about that in the context of longleaf? And longleaf pine forests are really a great climate smart forests. They are resilient, as we've touched on, through windstorms, wildfire, insects, and disease. They're highly adaptable to a wide range of habitats, that very dry, wet soils. They're longer lived and have a really dense and strong, durable carbon storage for a long time. And not just the tree, but there's some really great papers out there about how important and how much carbon the roots store, because you have these big tap roots into the soil. So you've got that above ground tree and also the herbaceous storage in these well-managed longleaf forests, and then that below ground carbon storage as well. And then there's all kinds of studies going on about the water use and efficiency and drought tolerance of longleaf forests. So as we're having different changes in our water tables, longleaf can adapt to that. They'll take up water more slowly if needed in a drought. They'll use water more efficiently in forest systems. And so it's something important to continue to look at. And, the longleaf forests just have this multiple benefits. They have these ecological values, but they can also provide this economic return with landowners. So that, all of these things coming together is considered climate smart, mitigating climate change through carbon sequestration, adapting forests to be more resilient, and then providing those benefits to society as well. So we're working, helping to lead a team that is almost finished with a climate smart forestry guide for longleaf. Probably be out in 1 to 2 months, depending on, maybe 6 weeks, depending on our final review stage and our design phase. So the audience for this is really anybody, but we're targeted towards private landowners, and then agency forestry staff, forestry practitioners, and decision makers, can utilize this initial climate smart guide that will be filled with 10 practices to help manage your longleaf forest for, future considerations and in a climate smart way. So I'm working on this with the Longleaf Alliance and folks from Clemson, and then we're having a lot of great reviewers that are helping to improve and make it even better. But something else that we're thinking more about, at least with the Nature Conservancy and then elsewhere too, is the competing land uses right now as well. There's always been urbanization has been a threat to forests and agriculture too, but renewable energy is also filling that space. And how can we think about smart siting with renewable energy in particular, but really with the others as well? Where are our longleaf forests best suited? How can they make a biggest impact? And can we have, 8 million acres of the 256 million acre southern forests be part of longleaf, be high quality longleaf? And then can we make sure that renewable energy and solar development that we need to help combat climate can also be placed in areas where it won't be impactful to conservation or wildlife movement and that kind of thing. So we're just touching on this with America's Longleaf, but this is an area that TNC is working on right now, and we'll see how we can help support guidelines and parameters, potentially to solar developers or to energy companies or those corporations are supporting renewable energy. Can we help just have those conversations to share input and parameters around, where best to avoid or, where to place that would be optimal for continued good forestry management in the South. And we'll still continue to have those other competing interests of forest monocultures and loblolly and slash pine that are growing and needs as well. So, and finally, I wanted to just also, mention how you can take action. I kept it simple. I think it's just so important too for each of us to share what we know about longleaf pine forests. I'm so embedded in it. I forget that not everybody knows what a longleaf pine forest is, and so just sharing these great properties, bringing your friends out to go hike and check it out, and then supporting those that work towards restoring them. And that you can see this great partnership here that's with the Longleaf Partnership Council, but that's not exclusive to a lot of the agencies and organizations working on longleaf restoration in the South. And a bit more specific example, in the Nature Conservancy, we have a program called Plant a Billion Trees, and I manage a portion of that funding that goes directly to planting projects across the range for longleaf pines. So if you ever wanted to get a school group involved with a lemonade stand and send money, somewhere to plant trees, this is an example. But there's so many others out there as well to do that with. And so just wanted to make sure to highlight that. And with that, we're glad to take any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Colette. We had a couple coming through the chat or through the Q&A tool, and I welcome any other audience members out there with questions to share their questions, but we'll address these first couple that have come in. The first one came from a forest management student at NC State University, and heard you mention the benefits of uneven aged management for longleaf pine. They did a project looking at restoring a hypothetical shortleaf pine savanna, and they're wondering if you could kind of expound on the silviculture of the longleaf savanna.
Yeah. Well, or uneven age management, I guess, to expand on that. Yeah. And so the idea there is rather than have a lot of forestry, and when I was at Clemson, how many years ago, 25 years ago, whatever that was, forest management was really taught at planting trees, letting them grow, clear cutting, and planting again. And so what we want to get at with uneven age management is a continuous forest where you plant trees, maybe to start with, or you have trees already, and you can let them grow. If it's longleaf, you're going to burn, put fire through there. That will thin some trees out. If your objective is timber, there are opportunities to go in and I call it selective harvest. I know that's not a great term in the Northeast, so I always say that carefully, but where you go in and carefully harvest trees that will be able to be sent to the mill or used for furniture or used for poles, and the landowner can make a profit, but you're still maintaining the overall forest. And you may be taking out those trees in a certain area or sections. You could still underplant longleaf there. Sometimes gaps in habitat are really great for wildlife or for a new plant to grow because it's getting more sunlight. So you still have the opportunity of utilizing wood for market, and making sure that you're not taking the trees that are your seed sources and things like that. But you're able to maintain a forest system more continuously, which over the long run may be more beneficial in a variety of ways. Carbon storage, wildlife values, maintaining those corridors, but also economic value for landowners, or hunting value for landowners, other recreational uses.
Great, thank you for that answer. Our next question that came through, in light of climate change, are there efforts being made to extend the range beyond the historical range to more northern areas and higher altitudes?
So there is a great paper, I don't have the citing off the top of my head, that talks about the movement of forests based on the climate conditions. And it has to do with rainfall patterns and soil conditions. So for oak species, forest populations are going north and west. And for longleaf and pines, they're going north and east. So I think about Virginia a lot. And actually, our Maryland chapter is doing some longleaf planting up there as well in smaller doses, which is a bit experimental. But while we haven't been focusing on that with America's Longleaf or partnership in collaborative ways, because we have so much to do, I think, in the range already, the existing range, it's been on a few folks' minds about that evolution. And I think taking care of that northeastern range is important, and factoring in that evolution. Marsh migration is another, it's something similar where on our coastal lines, the native marsh is going to start to change. We're going to have, tidal inundation and sea level rise. So the existing marsh, we want to make sure we have habitat for that important layer of ecosystem. And then that means that might be taking over some longleaf that is a little bit closer to the coast, but maybe we can make room for more longleaf inland. So there's a lot to think about there, but there's so much to do already when building our existing forests.
That's just so fascinating just how much foresight is going into this.
And there's a marsh migration, I'm not saying the title right, a new collaborative that's basing their collaborative work off of America's Longleaf, their structure. So yeah, it's good. We're talking together.
And this may have been addressed in one of our earlier talks this year, and I'd be happy to share a link to that program. But could you talk about how a red-cockaded woodpecker cavity insert works?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the cavity is built with, I guess it's probably pine. I should know that. I'm sure it's pine. And it's a really interesting how we're able to actually carve out a hole in a tree, insert the cavity that has the same size hole a red-cockaded woodpecker would make, and have it the right depth and all of that, and then kind of screen it for predators and seal it up in the tree at a high level, and that red-cockaded woodpeckers will start to use it. And there's a couple of reasons to use these instead of just letting RCWs do their own thing. One would be, like in the Virginia example, there were only 2 clusters left in this forest, and gosh, what great habitat there already exists, but they're not utilizing the trees, and trees with heart rot and mature longleaf are what red-cockaded woodpeckers are drawn to build those cavities and excavate them. It could take them around a year sometimes to build, so it's a long time to create new space. These are keystone species where other species are utilizing those habitats. So, that's one reason to go ahead and do that. And there's a lot of people across the range trained to do that. And Fish and Wildlife also helps monitor and, those occurrences and all of that with this federally listed species. So helping to expand an existing population, if there are not mature enough trees, which that's obviously the RCWs declined with the decline of longleaf. We don't have mature trees everywhere. So again, those RCWs aren't going to excavate a cavity in that tree that's not old enough to allow them to do that well. Then cavity inserts are placed, but also a growing factor is in storm events. And the Kisatchie National Forest lost the percentage. It's got somewhere like 75 to 90% of their nest trees. It was some high number, but don't quote me on that. So they had all kinds of people at the ready that came in as professionals, Fish and Wildlife, I'm sure helped organize, in addition to Forest Service and others, RCW biologists that came in, swooped in right after that storm, just started putting in these inserts. And that red-cockaded woodpecker population recovered within a year, which was amazing, where it would not have been able to excavate so many numerous cavities and get back into a tree in time after so many of their trees fell. And a reason that RCW trees do fall is because it's weak at the spot of the cavity, because it's got, a sort of a wound in the tree from what they excavated.
Colette, thank you so much. We really appreciate that presentation. That was awesome. Really appreciate all you've done and contributed to the longleaf pine restoration across the Southeast.
Thank you. Yeah, glad to do it. Glad to be here.